Liberty Church, please give a warm welcome to our dear friend for round two, Bill Federer.
Well, thank you, Pastor Paul. And I'm going to ask my son to come and say a word about one of the books as he comes up. My website's AmericanMinute.com, and you can sign up for a free daily email of something that happened on each day in history, and it points out the Christian faith that we have.
Now, I joke that via email, the American Minute is closer to the American 5-minute. It's grown over the years, but he is a historian to the bone, so he's constantly researching. So sometimes he says, we should add this to this significant, history of that day. So, yeah, AmericanMinute.com. The American Minute is a fun resource, and we have the 1-minute version in a book on our table here. But so we did, you actually just heard the first presentation of our Courageous Christianity book.
It was the first time.
A lot of figures in there. I know there's a lot of characters, but a theme that we wanted you to see was that look at the efforts of Charles Finney. The Lord moved in him, and then he just decided to drop what he was doing and answer the call. And I don't know that he could have imagined the impact that he's had. So, George Williams and what was birthed out of his ministry. So sometimes just doing the right thing that the Lord asks you to do at the right time, it's more than all the grand plans and everything you've been waiting for and calculating. Just being present and answering that call when God asks you to. Now, us as a covenant nation, meaning John Robinson and 102 people in the belly of the Mayflower were blown off course, and instead of being lawless, they were going to submit to the king in Jamestown. So instead of being lawless, they're blown off course, and they decide to covenant themselves together into a civil body politic in the belly of this Mayflower. From that moment, they said, God, with you as our witness, we're going to govern ourselves accordingly. So instead of just landing and just kind of doing whatever they wanted, they said, no, let's put some order in this, and let's make ourselves accountable to God. Now, when you look throughout our early history, especially like Revolutionary War, War of 1812, things like that, you see a staggering amount of miracles. And what's even more interesting is you don't see those same miracles on the other side. So you read the stories of the Battle of Cowpens or the Battle of Princeton where, George Washington rallies his troops and he has them follow him to the line of fire. He looks back and says, fire. Then the British return fire, and he's right in the middle of it. And the smoke clears, and he's still standing. Or the marksman that took 17 shots at him, and then before he died, he said, I want to meet General Washington. And he told them, I tried to take you down 17 times, and then I told my men, stop shooting. This man can't be taken down by bullets. When you read the history, these stories are fascinating on their own, but you start to see that there is a bigger picture, that it's when we honor our covenant agreement with God, then God says, all right, I'm allowed to bless you now. And I hope I'm not dipping into the sermon, but we use the analogy of magnets. So if you have two magnets, they stick together, but if one of them turns, even if the other one wants to touch, it repels. So when we turn to God and listen to him and do what we said we'd do, he says, all right, I can honor my end of this agreement and bless you as a nation. But when we sin and we turn from God, it's like turning our magnet away. God still wants to bless us, but he can't connect with us. So one of the books we have there is The Miracles in American History. There's 2 volumes. The distinction between the 2 volumes, this was kind of just a great idea that my mother had. She said, get to the good part more quickly. So they're short, inspiring, uplifting stories. And the volume 2, there's the caveat that it's when we as a nation come back to God. So it's when, after days of fasting and national prayer, after days of humility and prayer, then you see the hand of providence move. So anyway, thank you for listening to our first presentation on Courageous Christianity. And if you are interested in our miracles, I'd be happy to share more of those stories. But,
Amen. Amen. Good word. Good word. Thank you. So one of our books called Socialism, The Real History from Plato to the Present, I don't have it on the table, but it has a chapter on the battle for the mind, psychological warfare. So We talk about the YMCA, spirit, mind, and body. So your spirit is drawn to God, your flesh, your body is drawn away from God, and your mind is the battlefield. It's the decider. It's the switch. Who's going to win, right? And so the question is, who gets to load the software on the next generation's brains, right? If you think of it, your mind is like a super fancy computer. It's more than that, but it's at least that. And your body's like the computer case, which makes it silly for people to argue over what color the computer case is. Imagine if I were to say green computers are better than blue computers. Like, doesn't matter what color the computer is. What matters is what software is on it. Doesn't matter what color the iPhone is, but what apps are on it. Doesn't matter what color somebody's skin is what behavioral software is running on their brain. Is it love your enemies, turn your cheek, bless them that curse you, or is it cancel them, sue them, get it right? And so the battle is who gets to load, and the other side wants to put malware on the little kids' brains. They want to put viruses, they want to put corrupted files. So these little kids, don't even know if they're a boy or a girl. I mean, so that's where the battlefield is. The battle's for the mind. Karl von Clausewitz is a 19th century military theorist, and he gave the purpose of war. And the purpose of war is to force your opponent to submit to your will. Pretty simple, but you go through all the battlefields and the guns and the strategy to do what? Force your opponent to submit to your will. Well, now Sun Tzu's Art of War, 5th century BC, says supreme excellence in a commander consists of breaking your enemy's resistance without fighting. So it's like, hey, if you're a really, really good commander, you'll make your opponent think you're more powerful than you are, and you'll make them think they're weaker than they are, and you'll get them disoriented and confused, and then they'll surrender without a fight. Then you're a really good commander. Now it's called 5th generation warfare, where you get your enemy to surrender without them even being aware there is a war. If the goal is to get them to submit, what if you could get them to submit without them even waking up to realize there's a battle going on? That's where we're at. And so psychological operations was used during World War II. We would drop pamphlets down on German villages saying your side is already lost. Your commander just hasn't told you yet. And they're out there fighting. I heard we already lost. Why are we fighting, right? And yet the Japanese did it to us with Tokyo Rose. She's this woman with a seductive voice, and it would carry across the waves to our ships. And she would say, you Americans are terrible and awful. And it would demoralize our guys. And it's in the Bible. 12 spies go into the promised land. 10 come back with what? A negative report. And they spread fear. We're not able to go up. They're too strong for us. The land devours its inhabitants. The people are of a great stature. We're like grasshoppers. If only we had died in the land of Egypt. Let's just go back to return to Egypt. They're defeated in their mind. They didn't even get to the battlefield. And God was so mad that he says, okay, everybody that believed this lie is going to wander for 40 years. And then Gideon did it in reverse. There's 100,000 Midianites. That's a lot. And again, he gets 30,000. God said too many, whittles it down to 300. And then they stand around the enemy army with their torches, with a clay pot and a trumpet, and they smash the clay pot, lift up the torch, and they blow the trumpet. And the guys just stand there. They're not moving. They're just standing there blowing the trumpet. And the Midianites in the dark get up, and they're running and bumping into each other and pulling out their swords, and they're slashing each other, and they're killing each other. They're defeated in their mind. It was a psychological warfare is what Gideon did. And so the main thing is to get your enemy into fear and to discourage, demoralize, disorient, distract. And God's word is what? Fear not, fear ye not, fear him not, fear thou not, fear them not. Thou shalt not fear. So this is the battle. It's firing these fiery darts and us using the shield of faith. So it's in warfare, you have the outward attack, but then there's the inside attack. It's infiltrating and weakening your enemy from the inside. Now, Balaam. So they couldn't defeat Israel from the outside. So the prophet Balaam told King Balak that if you send the young Moabite women into the Israeli camp and lure the young men into sin, then you can defeat them, because God will be put into this position where if God still blesses them while they're in sin, he's giving consent to the sin. He's saying it's no big deal. And he can't do that because he's a just God, which means he has to judge every sin. And so what my son was talking about with the magnets, right? And so Balaam says, hey, get him to turn, get him to sin, and you'll be able to defeat him. And so God was so mad at Balaam that the book of Revelation even mentions him. angel church at Pergamos, a few things against you. You have those that hold the doctrine of Balaam, taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, eat things, sacrifice idols, and commit sexual immorality. So it's saying in the last days, there are going to be churches that are going to say, hey, sexual immorality, it's no big deal, just do whatever you want. So this fifth column, infiltration. In ancient Greek warfare, you'd have 2 columns and 2 flanks. And what's the fifth column? It's enemies inside of the camp. And so they're spreading confusion. Cicero writes to the Roman Senate, a nation can survive its fools, even ambitious, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he's known, and he carries his banners openly against the city. But the traitor moves among those within the gates freely, his sly whispers heard in the very halls of government. He works secretly to undermine the pillars of the city. He infects the body politic so that it can no longer resist. A murderer is less to be feared. So if you can't defeat him on the battlefield, you want to infiltrate on the inside and weaken him from within. And so this fifth column warfare, even Franklin Roosevelt said, we have seen the treacherous use of fifth column by which persons supposed to be peaceful visitors were actually part of an enemy unit of occupation. And then FDR writes, our enemies have spread falsehood and terror. They have started fifth columns everywhere, duped the innocent, fomented suspicion and hate between neighbors. FDR again, today's threat to our national security is the Trojan horse, the fifth column that betrays the nation unprepared for treachery, spies, saboteurs, traitors that are actors in this new strategy. So the socialists in Europe like Stalin, wanted to conquer the West with tanks. And a socialist named Antonio Gramsci said, you'll never defeat America with tanks. You have to rot it from within. You have to infiltrate and weaken it. It's called the long march through the institutions. It's going to take some while, but you got to infiltrate their schools. And Gramsci said, socialism is precisely the religion which must overwhelm Christianity. And so explaining Gramsci is James Wardner's book, Unholy Alliances. In the New Order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, right, with woke stuff, and the media, transforming the consciousness of society. And so in 1963, you had a congressman, Albert Herlong, reading into the congressional records these socialist tactics: infiltrate the press, infiltrate the churches, and replace revealed religion with social religion, right? Social justice. Get control of teachers' associations. Put party line in textbooks. Get control of schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and communist propaganda, right? They want to program the kids' little brains. Use student riots to foment public protests. And you've seen these riots, and they have the man on the street interview with the microphone, and they're like, why are you out here? Like, oh, we really don't know. We just got some text from Indivisible that said show up, get extra credit at school anyway. And so this idea of infiltrating is in the schools, in the classroom. And they have a term for it called deconstruction. It's where you separate a people from their past, get them into a neutral where they don't remember where they came from, and then it's easy to brainwash them into the future you have planned for them. And so they go into the classrooms and they tell the kids, well, the Founding Fathers were terrible people. They took land from India and sold people into slavery, and these kids are like, ew, they're evil. And then the kids get repulsed by them, and then the kids are into a middle open-minded, let's do comparative religion class, and we just don't have time to get around to Christianity. And then they portray socialism or the LGBTQ or whatever. It's a sales technique. If I was a toothpaste salesman, the first thing I would do is tell you negative things about the toothpaste that you're currently using. You're still brushing with that stuff? Haven't you read the article, it'll eat the enamel off your teeth? You're like, oh, really? You're repulsed by it. Now I have you in a neutral. You're open-minded. What are all the toothpastes out there? Then I give you my pitch for this brand new tartar-controlled breath freshener stuff, right? And Europe went through this. Europe went with 1,000 years of Catholic cathedrals, Protestant Reformation, and Jewish neighborhoods. And then Europe went to a secular neutral with the French Revolution. Free sex, anything goes, tear down churches. And now it's turning into a socialist Sharia Europe with Muhammad being the #1 name for newborns. right? It's a drive neutral reverse. I actually read where in Hamtramck, Michigan, was a Polish neighborhood outside of part of Detroit, and they got real liberal, and they elected the first lesbian city council member, and she was like, although we tolerate everything. And so then the Muslims come in, and they actually had a expose of, they sit around the kitchen table and would forge ballots and then drop them off and everything, and then they won. And she's like, gets voted out. And she's like, I didn't realize that you could actually tolerate people that want to get rid of you. And the French Revolution did that. They got rid of history. They tore down statues. Could you imagine students tearing down statues? They tore down the statue of good King Henry IV, right? He was trying to patch up the Protestants and the Catholics in the 1500s. And well, anyway, they tear his statue down. And then St. Genevieve, who was she? Attila the Hun, 450 AD, was sacking cities across Europe with an army of 500,000 Huns. And this young woman, Genevieve, gets all of Paris to fast and pray. And for some inexplicable reason, Attila skipped sacking Paris. So Genevieve is considered the patron saint of Paris. Oh, well, during the French Revolution, right, 1,400 years later, they dig up the bones of St. Genevieve and trash them. Why would you dig up somebody's bones that are 1,400 years old and trash them? Because you want to get rid of the past, get people new and neutral where they don't remember where they came from, and then you brainwash them into the future. And China did the same thing. 3rd century BC, called the Warring States period. 6 kingdoms fighting. One wins, led by Qin Shi Huangdi. And Qin Shi Huangdi was getting criticized for doing things differently than they had been done for centuries before. And he got tired of being criticized. So he decided to destroy all records of how things were done before. And he burnt tens of thousands of bamboo annal books. Right? They would write on strips of bamboo from top to bottom. And his chancellor, Li Si, writes in 213 BC, I, your servant, propose that all historians' records other than those of Quin's be burned. If anyone under heaven has copies of the classics of history, they shall deliver them to the governor for burning. Anyone who dares discuss the classics of history shall be publicly executed. Anyone who uses history to criticize the present shall have his family executed. Anyone who has failed to burn the books after 30 days of this announcement shall be sent to build the Great Wall, right? The Great Wall of China. But here in China, they realized, okay, you want to do something new, you got to get rid of the past. That inspired Mao Zedong in the 1960s to have a cultural revolution. And he destroyed thousands of years of Chinese culture. The Great Gates of Beijing, the oldest Buddhist temple in China, just get rid of all this history. And you would shame people publicly and destroy. And even Pol Pot did the same thing in Cambodia in the 1970s. He is a communist, and he decides that 1975 is the new year zero, and anything prior to that's irrelevant. So he decided to destroy all history. He killed anybody that wore glasses. He said if you wore glasses, you could read. If you read, you knew the history. And he wanted to get rid of the history, so he killed 1/3 of his country, like 3 million people. And the Muslims, whenever they would come into a country, they would destroy history. The oldest library in the world was in Alexandria, Egypt, and in the 600s, Amir ibn al-As comes in and they conquer, and they get to this library at Alexandria, and they see all these old books. And they send a message to Caliph Umar and says, what do we do with these old books? And supposedly he answered, every book that does not agree with the Quran, destroy. And every book that does agree with the Quran is redundant because we have the Quran, so destroy them all. It took 6 months to burn them all. And so whenever the Muslims would come in, they'd rename everything. The communists did it. Remember Lenin? They changed St. Petersburg to Leningrad, right? I mean, just change everything. And Carl Sandburg said, when a nation goes down, one condition may always be found: they forgot where they came from. So you want to that's why it bothered me so much when they would have all these sports teams. Get rid of the Washington Redskins. Get rid of the Land O'Lakes where it had the little Indian woman on the front. Get rid of this. It's like, why would you want to do that? And he says, it's a socialist tactic. You want to erase all history. And George Orwell wrote the book 1984. He wrote it in 1948. All right, it's easy to remember when he wrote it. And in the book, there is a character named Winston. And he works for the government in the Department of Truth, the Ministry of Truth, but all he does is lie. And he sits at his desk, and there's a pneumatic tube. Remember the banks, you put your little deposit, and it sucks it up that tube? Well, that was a brand new invention in 1948, like new technology. So he sits at his desk, down the pneumatic tube comes the history that needs to be changed. And he takes his little penknife, and he cuts out the real history, and he pastes in some fake history, and then he takes the real history, puts it in another pneumatic tube on the other side of his desk, and it sucks it down into the incinerator in the basement. And it's called Down the Memory Hole. And so George Orwell writes, every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. I know, of course, that the past is falsified, but it would never be possible for me to prove it, even when I did the falsification myself. After the thing is done, no evidence ever remains. The only evidence is inside my own mind, and I don't know that any other human being shares my memories. Everything faded into mist, the past was erased, the erasure was forgotten, the lie became truth. I mean, if they can lie about a present-day news article, all history is old present-day news article. So you can change history if it helps you achieve your agenda. Orwell said, those who control the past control the future, but those who control the present control the past. If you control the present, you get to decide what's in the history books, and you can feed these kids lies, reprogram with lies. So it's called the 1916 Project, or Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States, which is this history book that says all the founders of America are bad, 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 because they want the kids to emotionally separate from them so they can brainwash them into their socialist future. Now, this is probably the most interesting part of my talk. Has it been interesting so far? Yes. But this is marketing. What is marketing? It's influencing people's behavior to buy a product. But if we just say it's influencing people's behavior, in the 1866, influencing behavior to buy a product was what? Wells Fargo wagon and Sears catalog. And you would make an informed purchase. You would learn every detail about a Singer sewing machine before you bought it. But in the early 1900s, they came up with magazine ads where they would say nothing about a product. They would just make it look like everybody's using it. And Crisco was the classic. Nobody knew what was in Crisco. They even invented a new word, vegetable-based, but nobody knew what it was. They marketed it so successfully, it put out of business the lard industry, tallow. And do you know what Crisco was? It's cottonseed oil. In the Deep South, they would harvest cotton and have mountains of these black seeds that they would mush into black, mucky oil that they would use in factories and machinery. Nobody ate that stuff. It's called industrial seed oil. But somebody had the idea of bleaching it, putting these containers, and we've all ingested it. So you go from knowing everything about a Singer sewing machine to knowing nothing about a product, but you're eating it and injecting it into your body, right? And so it's the keeping up with the Joneses. It's realizing that people will buy something if they see other people with it. And the person that came up with this idea is Edward Bernays. His uncle was Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst that discovered that we are social creatures. We want to be accepted by a group, and we do not want to be rejected by a group. As simple as that is, that's the whole concept of brainwashing. And so he writes a book called Propaganda in 1928, and he talks about women buying shoes. He says women go into a department store and think they're picking out shoes. They're not. The marketing executive picked out the shoes for them. and paid the actors to put them on and paid the photographer to take the pictures and paid the magazine to print it, and the lady see it in the magazine and wanted it. And he says, the larger manufacturer of women's shoes has a popular actress. She wears the shoes, the fashion spreads. The man who injected this idea into the shoe industry was ruling women in one department of their social lives. Today, the minority has discovered a powerful help in influencing the majority to mold the minds of the masses. They find in propaganda a tool which is increasingly powerful, regimenting the public mind. So the same way that you can influence people's behavior to buy a product, you can influence people's behavior for politics. And he pushed smoking cigarettes. He changed the name of propaganda to public relations. A little easier to swallow. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, social conduct, ethical thinking, we're dominated by a relatively small number of persons. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind. So marketing of products turned into marketing of politics. Declaration says government from the consent of the governed. But what if you could engineer the consent of the governed? So he writes a book called The Engineering of Consent. Manipulation of the opinion of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. And so he writes a book, Crystallizing Public Opinion. Another guy writes a book, Manufacturing Consent. So think of a water molecule is individual, but you put it with other water molecules and they operate as a group, like a wave. A fish in a bowl, but you put it with other fish and they operate as a group. A bird in a cage, but you put it with other birds and they operate in a group. Well, guess what? We're individuals. But you put us with other individuals and we're constantly giving and receiving feedback. Are we being accepted or are we being rejected? You're constantly checking it. Are they accepting me? Or are they rejecting me? And so this fear of rejection and desire for acceptance, every school kid goes through this. Every school kid wants to be invited to the party and wants to be picked for the team. And nobody wants to be not invited to the party and not picked for the team. And so they've weaponized that to push this reprogramming agenda on the kids. It's called social emotional learning or behavior modification. And so they've turned education from academic achievement into this behavior modification. Most of the world calls this honor-shame culture. In Asia, it's a really big deal if the group honors you, your worth as a person goes up. If your group shames you, I mean, they'll commit suicide because they're so embarrassed. In Islam, they call it the ummah, the community. If your group honors you, that's great, but if your daughter embarrasses you in front of the community, they'll murder their own daughter to regain their pride, their honor. And so this human desire to want to be accepted by a group was studied in the 1960s and 70s. It's called the Solomon Asch Conformity Experiment. And they did it on college campuses. And they would pull 8 students into a classroom. 7 had been paid ahead of time to be actors. 1 was a naive participant. And the teacher put 2 cards on the front desk. One card had 1 line, the other card had 3 lines, one shorter, one longer, one the same. And beginning with the paid actors, one by one, they would convincingly say the shorter line was equal to the first line. And by the time it got around to the 8th naive participant, 30% of them would deny their own eyes to fit in with the group. Right? There's a group of 8 strangers, and this one guy's hearing, yeah, the shorter line, yeah, the shorter line. And they finally get, yeah, okay, I agree with the group. They doubt their perception. These people must know more than they do. If just one of the other 7 objects, it goes from 30% down to 5%. But the idea of people want to be accepted, so they'll deny their own eyes. They're looking at it, but they're like, I want to be accepted by this group. And so in the founding of America, the group was predominantly Christian. The time of the country, 98% Protestant, 1% Catholic, 10% Jewish, but it was all Bible-based. And so the non-Christians would feel pressured to adopt Christian behavior. Now, we would hope that they all get saved, but a lot of them weren't, but they would adopt Christian behavior because they wanted to be accepted by the group, which was predominantly a Christian group. But now they have taken control of the public opinion influencers, right? The TikTok, all the little videos, all the stuff that these kids watch. And so now they're anti-Christian. And they're creating this perception that the group is anti-Christian, and these kids want to be accepted by a group, and so they're moving in that direction. It's sort of the problem that every Christian school has. It starts off really strong, and then there's an unsaved kid, and you say, well, let me put him in the Christian school, maybe he'll get saved. And 1, 2, 3, but what if there's like 10% or 20% of unsaved? What if there's 50%? All of a sudden, what if you get more unsaved people than there are? They're going to exert a negative peer pressure on the good kids, right? And so think of Disney. They push millions of dollars worth of product. Frozen t-shirts, frozen pajamas, frozen Band-Aids, frozen nightgowns, and it's all based on what? Getting a child to want something. Billions of dollars, and it's all based on getting a child to want something. Child psychology. And so they create this perception. These kids see the little cartoons, they see the movies, they see the Happy Meals, they see all this stuff, and they want to be accepted in the group, because then if they have it, they're like cool, right? And but now they put it in the classroom. They've taken this group desire for acceptance and fear of rejection into the classroom. It's called the pyramid of oppression. And the top of the pyramid are the cisgendered. That's their term for somebody who believes there is a male and a female. They're the oppressors. They're the bad guys. Down the pyramid are the asexual, bisexual, homosexual, pansexual, transsexual, 70 different genders, anything. And then they ask the kids, which one are you? Well, nobody's going to pick the oppressor, so they pick any of the other ones, right? Because they don't want to be isolated and kicked out of the group. They want to be accepted. And so here's Maryland's largest school district sees a 500% increase in non-binary trans students. Trans-identifying students increased 991% over 2 years in wealthy D.C. suburb. 1,800 students, UC Davis, identify as trans, non-binary. 25% of all students say they're LGBT. Here's one, Kim Iverson, unprecedented 5,000% surge in trans teens. It works. Kids want to be accepted. And when the teacher says, okay, we're going to celebrate you if you come out this way, and we're going to shame you, the kids are like, well, I want everybody to say nice things about me, and I don't want to be left out. And so psychologists call it the spiral of silence. People will self-censor their views if they think they're in the minority. If your perception of everything on the internet and everybody is that, oh, they all believe this, you're going to keep yourself quiet. You don't want to be the one that's going to get the ire and be kicked out of the group. Saul Alinsky says, ridicule is man's most potent weapon. So they want to make you feel shamed. Chuck Colson talked about a wine tasting experiment. Every couple was in on it except one. And they poured vinegar in the wine. And this couple writes down, this tastes terrible. But one by one, the other couples would stand up, oh, this was great. It had character. It was delicious. It got around to the naive couple. They scratched out what they wrote, and they agreed with the group. Oh, yeah, it tasted really good. And then when somebody said, I think all they did was pour vinegar in the wine, the person that changed their views criticized the person for saying they poured vinegar in the wine. And it's a phenomenon called false enforcement. Once people buy into a lie, they will help enforce that other people buy into the lie. It's like, I don't know why I'm wearing something on my face, but I'm going to pull up my camera and get a picture of you not wearing it on your face, right? It's like a magnet with those little metal filings, and like you line them up, and each one that touches gets the magnetic charge that tries to pull the next one in, and they all try to line up, So this idea of fitting in with the group and then manipulating our perception of what the group believes, and then we feel the subconscious pressure to want to go along with it. World War II, our guys made it through. Stalag 13, Hogan's Heroes, The Great Escape. Why? Because they had a group. Yeah, they were prisoners, But they could go back in their barracks and there's the group and they got the support. But the Korean War was different. They isolated prisoners for days, weeks, months. And when they were in this solitary confinement and isolated, they even came up with the term brainwashing. It's a Buddhist term that goes from cleansing the mind, blanking out the mind, right, and everything. And so it was an emotional reset. And they would get these guys where they would just be craving, wanting another human interaction. And when they're at that vulnerable spot, they'd bring them into a room with guys who had already caved. And before they could get the emotional reinforcement and the slap on the back and, oh, you're one of us now, they had to reject America. They're like, okay, yeah, America's bad, America's terrible. All right, you're one of us, right? And it went into their psyche. So even after they were rescued, they still hated America. And so the idea is you take this nationally and you isolate everybody in the country, in their homes, you social distance them for days, weeks, months, years, until they just get to this vulnerable, emotional spot saying, I just crave wanting to go out for dinner, a restaurant, I just want to go shopping again, I want to just be able to talk to people. And they say, yeah, but before you can do that, you have to inject this and wear this and have us track you everywhere you go. It's like, yeah, whatever, I just want to get back to normal. And so this, one of the successful resistances to this brainwashing technique is a sense of humor. I thought that was sort of funny. Anyway, so the honor shame culture is you're caring about what people think about you. When you come down to it, that's pride. That's the sin of Satan. And it's the sin of Cain. Cain wanted to worship God, but he did it through his works. And we know it's works because God told Adam, the ground is cursed for your sake, and you'll bring forth fruit by the sweat of your brow. Sweat is work. So here's Cain trying to work his way to heaven. If you do works, you can be proud of your works because you're doing more than your brother. And God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And so when Cain's works were rejected, it says his countenance fell. His pride was hurt. He was embarrassed in front of his group, which was the mom, dad, and brother. But that was enough. He was embarrassed in front of his group, and instead of trusting in the lamb, he goes and he murders his brother. Right? Abel trusted in the lamb. And by trusting in the lamb, you're implicitly acknowledging you're insufficient in yourself. Right? There's God on one side, you're on the other side, and you're like, I'm insufficient. And the lamb takes the judgment for the sin instead of you taking the judgment for the sin, right? And once the judgment's paid, then you're reunited with God. And so Exodus 23, neither shall you follow the multitude in doing evil. There will be a group, a multitude. They will be doing evil, and you are supposed to be the stick in the mud. You're supposed to be the one that says, I am not going to care about this multitude doing evil. One translation, do not follow the crowd when it does what is wrong, and don't allow the popular view to sway you into offering testimony to pervert justice. Exodus 23, another translation, don't do something just because everybody else is doing it. If you see a group of people doing wrong, don't join them. You must not let them persuade you. You must do what is right. You know, the left being accepted by the group, it's a moving goalpost, right? I want to be accepted by the group. Well, what if the group moves to the left? Okay, well, I want to be accepted by them, so I'm going to have to adopt more. I mean, think of J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter author, and she was sort of on the left woke for a long, long time, right? And then when they moved further to the left and moved the goalpost, she says, no, I still believe there's a male and a female. And they're like, oh, we're going to cancel you. You're bad. You're terrible. It's like, what? She was just a hero a short time ago, right? The goalpost is going to move until finally they're tolerating Satan. Oh, we got to be tolerated by America. Yeah, we got to let the Satanists have their statue in the Iowa State Capitol, whatever. Whatever. But it's like, no, I'm sorry. I draw the line. I am not going to tolerate Satan. But some people are. They're going to want to go with the group. It's a moving goalpost. So this idea of influencing the group, Athens had no king. If there's a king and you have an agenda, you got to get in to see the guy. But in Athens, they didn't have a king. They had 6,000 citizens. And if you wanted to influence 6,000 citizens, how are you going to do that? It's going to take a long time. That's when they came up with theater. They would put on plays, comedies, tragedies, satires, and they would get all 6,000 people in the theater and they would put on a play. You read Aristophanes, who wrote comedies. It's like Saturday Night Live. They would make fun of living politicians at that day. and rib them and just make fools. And you would leave the theater saying, oh, I'm so embarrassed for that guy. They really made fun of him. And you would back away from them and everything they stood for. And then in the tragedies, they would honor and extol somebody doing something noble and dying. And then you would say, I want to be remembered like that guy. And you would want to you'd modify your behavior to fit in with that. And so from ancient theater till now, media entertainment is always political in a country where the people make the decisions. And so think of your favorite movie or sitcom. There's a character you like, you identify with. They're cute, they're funny, they're the hero. And as the series goes on, this character begins to make morally compromising decisions. A little lust, a little cheating, a little revenge. And you find yourself apologizing for him. Saying, yeah, I know James Bond is with a woman he's not married to, but he's about to save the world. So can we get on with the story? And it minimizes something that used to be important to you, marital fidelity. And then they make people that hold old traditional values look like backwards and bumpkins and simpletons and idiots, and you turn off the TV and say, yeah, that person looked old-fashioned. And you want to modify your behavior as a result of watching this show. So the country is controlled by laws. Laws are controlled by politicians. Politicians are controlled by voters. Voters are controlled by public opinion. And public opinion is controlled by media in the short run, education in the long run, the church, right, and the internet. And all three of the others use the internet. So whoever controls the internet can decide what gets canceled and what doesn't. Judge Learned Hand said the hand that rules the press, the radio, the screen, and the far-spread magazine rules the country. And Will and Ariel Durant, democracy, the most difficult of all forms of government, requires widest spread of intelligence. Ignorance lends itself to manipulation by those forces that mold public opinion. Now, the media forming public opinion. During the Spanish-American War, Cuba, Spain sent over a General Valeriano Weyler, and he ordered all law-abiding Cubans to go to a concentration camp. And everybody that didn't go in there would be shot on sight as a rebel. But they didn't have any plumbing and fresh water on these concentration camps, and an estimated 400,000 died. And so the word of what's going on in Cuba is coming to America, but we don't want to get involved. But William Randolph Hearst, with his New York Journal, and Joseph Pulitzer, like Pulitzer Prize, his newspaper, New York World, they would print on paper that would turn yellow after a couple days, so it's called yellow press journalism. And they didn't have the ability to print photographs, so they needed an artist to do etchings. So they sent Frederick Remington to Cuba, and he saw all the starving people. And so they said, you draw pictures of them. Hearst cabled Remington, you furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war. This was the media saying, hey, we know that as the media, we can influence the people, then the people will influence the politicians will influence the laws, and the country will get involved in the war. And that was a righteous thing, wanting to free those Cubans, but the press begins to realize, hey, we got some power. And Oswald Spengler, democracy has become a weapon of the moneyed interests. It uses media to create the illusion that there is consent of the governed. And then we have the media and entertainment pushing fear. And so 1938 radio drama War of the Worlds. We interrupt this program to announce that New Jersey is being invaded by Martians. It spread across the country instantly. People ran outside looking in the sky for spaceships. It was a phenomenon that was studied by psychologists. People will do what they others see people doing, but they'll also react to fear being pushed by the media. And then you begin to have these psychological dramas like gaslighting. And Ingrid Bergman starred in the movie, and her aunt was an actress in London who gets jewels given to her, and then she dies and leaves Ingrid Bergman her flat, but Ingrid Bergman puts all the jewels and everything in the attic. And a guy knows it's there, and so he courts Ingrid Bergman and then marries her in those old movies. He says, oh, you go to bed, I'm going to go out and smoke my pipe. But he'd go out down the alley, climb up the fire escape, go across the roofs, and then open the window, climb in, and turn the gas lamp on in the attic to root around looking for jewels. And whenever he did, the gas light in her bedroom would get dimmer. And she said, you know, whenever you go for your walk, the light in my bedroom gets dimmer. And he goes, you're seeing things. Your eyes are playing tricks on you. I think the stress is getting to you if you're losing your aunt. I think we're going to take you to a psychiatrist. And he's about to sign her away to an insane asylum when some guy across the street sees it go on in the attic, it's dimmer in the bedroom, comes over and they arrest the guy, the bad guy. But this idea went into our vernacular. It's called gaslighting. And psychology today, victims of gaslighting are systematically fed false information that leads them to question what they know to be true. They end up doubting their memory, their perception, even their sanity. And then the military gets involved with a motion picture service. But then the Germans, Joseph Goebbels, read Edward Bernays and said people will do what they see other people doing. So he would organize these Colosseum events with 100,000 people, and they would begin to give the Hitler salute in the front. And it would work its way back like a wave at a football game. And as it got closer to you, you would feel pressured to give it. Then people would see you giving it, and they'd feel pressured to give it. And everybody would leave the stadium thinking, well, I guess everybody's in on this Nazi stuff because I saw them all saluting. And it was this manipulation of what you thought other people were believing and accepting, and you would feel the pressure to comply. Goebbels says this is the absolute right of the state to supervise the formation of public opinion. Think of the press as a great keyboard on which the government can play. And so during the Cold War, we had the government had Operation Mockingbird, where they had 400 people in the press, ABC, CBS, that would, Washington Post, New York Times, that would write stories from the government perspective to warn America of the dangers of the communists. And when this became public, it says, huge CIA operation reported in U.S. against anti-war forces. And so they had what's called Senator Frank Church hearings, and they passed the Smith-Mundt Act, which stopped the government from trying to manipulate the media to influence public opinion. Now, nobody really believes they stopped it, but at least they said they did. And Carl Bernstein writes an article, Rolling Stone magazine, CIA in the media, talks about Alan Dulles, the head of the CIA, having these influencers molding public opinion. And it stopped, but Obama brings it back in 2012. He signs the repeal of the Smith-Mundt Act and passes the National Defense Authorization Act, Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which allows the government to get back into disseminating government-produced media content to sway public opinion. And then Obama, 2015, gives an executive order using behavioral science insights to better serve the American people. What's behavioral? It's psyops, psychological operations. We want to be accepted by a group. We don't want to be rejected. And then Obama signs the 2016 Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act, which gives him the authority to decide what's disinformation, what's not, and he can cancel it. And so here's the, but now with AI, a study was done on University of Zurich where researchers went through Reddit users. So Reddit, R-E-D-D-I-T, is a website where people put questions and answers and they post. And so the AI went through all the users and developed a profile of each one of them based on what they posted. And then they had bots, B-O-T-S, which are sort of computer, robots, but they would post answers to the Reddit sites, and they found out that the bots were 6 times more effective at getting people to change their opinions than humans were. Wow. So they can individualize deception just for you. They can study you, know your likes, know your fears, and then they can push all your buttons, and they can have computers develop stuff to say, okay, we want to sway this person to believe from that to this. And AI researchers ran a secret experiment on Reddit users to see if they could change their minds. The results were creepy. And now you go back to the Bible, and you had the majority of the people love Jesus. He comes into Jerusalem on a donkey, and they're putting palm branches down saying, Hosanna to the highest. But the chief priests are the minority influencers. And they go among the crowd, and they tell Pilate, they stir the people up to yell for Pilate to crucify Jesus. So you had the minority of influencers influencing the majority of the people who 4 days earlier were praising Jesus, and they cry out for him to be crucified. chief priests moved the people that he should rather release Barabbas. And so Pilate did what the majority of the people wanted, but the majority of the people did what the minority authority figures, the chief priests, did. You know, this idea of wanting to be accepted in a group and a fear of rejection, Jeremiah the prophet is talking to King Zedekiah and says, the Lord says, if you surrender to the king of Babylon, Jerusalem will be spared, and if not, it'll be burned to the ground. And King Zedekiah says, what will Jews in captivity say about me? It's like, dude, they're already in captivity. Why do you, the king, care about what these other people say about you when the prophet says, look, surrender and I'll be spared? The fear of being rejected by a group. And so it says, many believed on him, Jesus, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue, for they love the praise of men more than the praise of God. Jesus says, you receive honor one from another, and seek not the honor that cometh from God only. Peter's with a group around the fire, and a girl gets in his face and says, you are with Jesus. And you can just picture Peter looking around the fire, everybody's eyeing him, and he says, I never met the guy. It's like, that's it, Peter, you caved that quickly? You were just with Jesus a few hours ago, right? It is a real fear for us to be kicked out of a group, a professional group, a family group. But it's almost like God set this up. I mean, if you were God and you wanted to populate heaven, wouldn't you want to fill it full of people that loved you and wanted to be around you, which means you have to give them the choice not to love you and not to be around you? Well, how are you going to set it up? You set it up so that there's a default setting for us to want to be accepted by the group. And it takes an act of your will to say, I don't care about the group. All I care about is Jesus, right? And so after the resurrection, Peter's called into the Sanhedrin. And they say, we gave you strict orders not to speak in this name, or we're going to kick you out of the group, the synagogue. And Peter replied, we must obey God rather than men. What happened to Peter? He was filled with the Holy Spirit. There's something about being filled with the Holy Spirit that all you care about is pleasing God. You don't care about pleasing men. I mean, they're going to all pass away anyway. Jeremiah says, be not afraid of their faces, for I'm with thee to deliver thee. And then Jesus even said, you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but he endures to the end to be saved. The part of our life, we're the bride of Christ, right? And every romance novel builds up to what? A decision-making moment, a forsaking of all others and choosing the one. I think God is pushing the world to a decision-making moment, and some are going to choose the all others. Right, they're going to want to be liked and friended and followed in that moving goalpost, right? And they'll move until they're finally accepting Satan. And others say, I don't care about the all others. All I care about is Jesus. And so here's Sam Coonrod, a Giants pitcher, and he's the only one not to kneel in protest to the flag. And they asked him afterwards why. He says, I am a Christian, so I just believe that I can't kneel before anything besides God. It's only when you have a relationship with God do you not care about whether people accept you or reject you. Orlando Magic forward Jonathan Isaac was the lone player not to stand and protest. And afterwards they asked him, he says, all lives are supported through the gospel. Everyone's made in the image of God, and we all share in his glory. And so it's approval of man or approval by God. And it's the Cain versus Abel. It's the pride to the sin of Satan. And so again, we're the bride of Christ. And so I think God is pushing the world to this decision-making moment. And here we are. And so when we go through this, and you know, The Wizard of Oz, that movie, it's like, I'm the great Oz, and then the little dog Toto pulls back the curtain, you see it's an old man at the microphone, and you're not afraid of him anymore. It's like there's all these, everybody's believing this, everybody's going along with this. And then when you finally strip back and you see, there's people behind the scenes trying to create this impression that all these news media, you know, one time I saw a report that lots of the major news media, they're all owned by like the same people. Yeah. And they're just saying, you know, say the same thing, and we see it enough times that we think it's, but God is intentionally wanting us to have courage to stand up for him and him alone. Amen. So today, we're facing a country that has been under the spell, and the world for that matter, and I think God has given us a reprieve. And I think that the Lord is wanting us to respond. And if we respond, I think he'll have the reprieve go on longer. Amen. But if not, it can hit the fan pretty fast. And but it's an exciting time to be alive. And I mentioned after the first service, but think of if you get to heaven, imagine if there's something about at least men, I don't know about women, but men like to fight. I mean, little boys. I have 11 siblings. Right? I mean, 5 brothers, 5 sisters. So we grew up fighting. I was 5th, so I got beat up on, but I got to beat up. It's a nice balance. And if there wasn't anything to fight about, we would make it up. I mean, I remember walking down a gravel road out in the country at a lake place, and my one brother picks up a pebble and throws it at another brother's head. Well, the other brother picks up a pebble and throws it back. Well, the other one picks up one, and then the pebbles turn into like stones and then rocks, and the person were pelting each other with rocks. And if you're ever in a rock fight, with your left hand, throw a bunch of rocks really high, and then you can wing a couple line drives really good. But it's like boys like to fight, So they play cowboys and Indians, and they play sports and all this. It's competition. God lets us participate in the ultimate competition. But imagine if you were alive when everything was done. Like all the babies were fed, all the diseases were cured, everybody knew the Lord, and you get to heaven, and you're sitting around with the Moses and the David and the Gideon, and they're all talking about their stories of standing up to Pharaoh and standing up to Goliath, and they go, tell us what you did. They go, it was all done by the time I came around. They're going to say, boring. So for the rest of eternity, you'll be known as the boring story person. But no, you get to say, no, let me tell you, they were wanting to mutilate little kids. They were wanting to kill babies. And I said, enough. And whether I can turn around or not, I'm going to let the Lord and everybody know whose side I'm on. I'm going to stand up for righteousness, stand up for the Lord. And I want to thank you for allowing me to be with you today. God bless you.